Here's what I've learned living abroad for 5 years in a foreign country and in a quote, third world country. It's remarkably easy to get a nutritional deficit and not realize it, particularly if you are relying on non processed foods that are not fortified. So, fruits, vegetables, tofu, legumes, black beans, white beans, pinto beans, lentils of a variety of different types. And you can eat the most healthy version of your diet that you've ever had in your entire life. But because you're excluding meat, you might not realize that you are iron deficient. And while this is mild for people and adults most of the time, in developing children, it is quite damaging because the neurons will actually not myelinate properly. And this can cause a delay, a hidden delay, and ultimately lowered IQ, behavioral problems, and problems with inhibition later on. But by the time that a parent realizes it, it's often too late because an iron deficiency can be so insidiously slow creeping that you have no idea until it is smack in your face and you know that there's something wrong. When I looked into the literature of iron deficiency around the world, I was surprised to see that it's one of the leading, if not the leading, nutritional deficit that we have, especially for those that are trying to be vegan and vegetarian. Except if you are eating processed foods. This was really intriguing to me because you're supposed to be able to get enough iron from things like tofu and lentils and black beans and greens and things of that nature. But when I found a sneaking iron deficiency, I caught it before it was actually a deficiency in both myself and my little one. What I observed is that in our modern diet, there are a lot of should be okays, is okay, and not quite sure, but I'm going to eat it anyway. And there are these assumptions about nutrition and that everything is adequately met. And what I find is that I believe this is bullshit, to be honest with you, to some degree. Of course, it's not all or none, but why do we believe that our diets are just as nutritious as Google tells us that they are? Why do we believe that? Why do we believe Healthline, which is my go-to nutritional informational source, my go-to? Why do we believe those stats? Because they're the first ones that are presented to us. Where did they come from? Who did they come from? Was it an independent source? Do we ever stop to ask these questions? And when you look into the history of our food and agricultural publications, what you'll find is that our food has been losing nutritional value for years. Don't quote me on the exact numbers because I did this research about a year ago and I did it for a different project. So I'm drawing from this now, but not trying to be precise. I believe it was since the 70s compared to the 90s. Our nutrition and just the core vitamins had already dropped by like 30%. And considering how we have taken care of the earth, or not taken care of the earth, and the lack of sustainability practices when it comes to growing our food, and how we have literally put toxic sludge coated with PFAs and other forever chemicals, in addition to industrial waste materials. We have been using industrial byproducts and chemicals on our land as fertilizer, somehow not believing that it is going to be in our food supply. It's kind of crazy if you think about it. Like, the whole food cycle and the water cycle, everything is connected. And if you poison one, it gets into the bodies of all of the animals and the humans that eat it. And anyway, but that's not quite the point. So the way that we have grown our food has been mismanaged, let's just say, from one perspective. From another perspective, it has been optimized for mass production. And it has created a stream of edible food that people have lived and survived and perhaps thrived on. But at what point do we stop and ask ourselves, is it still working for us? Why do we just take it on face value that the vitamins and the minerals don't really vary between plant to plant or farm to farm, or places where they've put the toxic sludge versus other places where they haven't? And when I started doing some research into this, what I found is that there's just this blanket understanding that a carrot is a carrot is a carrot. And there's no difference. There's no difference in the nutrition, really. Except if you go organic, then it's going to have fewer pesticides that show up in your body and your urine, to be precise. And that people say there's nothing to be worried about with the 12 to 15 different pesticides that coat our fruit, and that it's no big deal, even though it is actually processed in our bodies. And there are some questions about whether or not that research has been conducted fairly and ethically and presented in a way that is not corrupted for everybody to make their own judgment, following up on the last episode about 3M. We also see problems in the food industry with people getting silenced, opposition getting buried, and people say, no, don't worry about that glyphosate. I know it's in your children's bodies, but it's fine. No, yeah, it's fine. Yeah, don't worry. We did the research. Yeah, no, it's good. Wink. And so at some point in my food discovery journey, what I realized is that I was eating the healthiest I've ever eaten in my entire life. And yet something still wasn't working properly. And I was eating plenty of tofu and lentils and not eating out, cooking my own food, whole foods, like actually creating my meals, not using packages, except for some crackers here and there. But, I was really dedicated to being as healthy as possible. And so imagine my surprise when I came to realize that so much of our food has been fortified for our benefit. Our flour is fortified. Our cereals are fortified. Our prepackaged meals are fortified. We have so many vitamins that are loaded into our drinks, into our food, that we would never know if actually our food, the raw product, was degrading or not, unless you went off of a processed food diet. I'm not saying that this is the cause of the low ferritin that myself and my little one had, who was starting to show symptoms of low iron. And we were just at that threshold, just at like the bare minimum before a full-blown iron deficiency, like just right at the edge. There's no way to know where it comes from. And this is also part of the problem. There's no way to know. Just take our word for it. You're fine. Everything's fine. Everything's good. No, yeah. No, these pesticides aren't a problem. No, everything's just as nutritious as it was, even though from the 70s to the 90s, we knew that important vitamins in vegetables and fruits were dropping, that the water content was higher. We've continued to make modifications along the way. Yeah, the GMOs, they don't create abnormal protein synthesis in plants that you then eat, which causes a potential inflammatory reaction. No, that's all bogus science. There's nothing wrong with GMOs. We edit the genes. They produce different proteins that your body isn't used to. And then you eat it. But don't worry. We did the research. How do we know? When I went back to the United States recently, it was interesting because I was talking to people that were talking about fasting a lot and how better they felt. And almost as though there was something about taking a break from food that was healing their bodies. And this coincided with a TikTok that I watched a long time ago about this doctor who, for a variety of different autoimmune diseases and psoriasis and cancer, they actually ask people to stop eating. And they starve through intermittent fasting, cancers, and they change the gut profile to create a different environment that the body then starts to heal down to like the tight junctions. So the actual way that the gut cells are connecting together become healthier, the way that they were designed, almost as though there's something in our food supply that is creating problems. If food is medicine and food is supposed to heal, then logically, if you're sicker while you're eating, then that's no longer true, right? If you get better by abstaining from food, there's something wrong with the food. But how do we know? An apple is an apple is an apple. It looks the same as it always has. Does it? I found out recently that the big agricultural groups, I believe it's like 4 companies. Again, don't quote me on this. I'm not trying to be an authority on big ag. I'm not. I'm just sharing with you my impressions and the knowledge that I have gained from my own independent research. There's like 4 big companies that kind of do everything. And recently, they have incorporated a new chemical to allow for food to stay fresher. And they spray the fruits, and I believe the vegetables, but definitely the fruits, with this chemical. And what it does is it delays the rotting process. I noticed last year that bananas were not ripening the way that they were normally ripening. Like they would stay green for 5 days, and then 2 days suddenly turn brown and collapse inward in a gooey mess inside. I hypothesize, because I believe this is part of the problem, I hypothesize that the bananas were sprayed with this chemical because when you look at the research of it, it actually delays the ripening process. And it's made for the preservation to reduce food waste. But I actually find that it changes the components of the inside flesh to where it's rubbery. And you see all of these people on TikTok showing like blueberries that don't tear open. They're like this little ball of rubber that you can bounce in the garbage disposal. And you'll see rubber watermelons and other fruit. And it's not all related to this chemical per se, but there's modifications done in our food supply without our knowledge. Because you have to kind of be in the research lanes, keeping up on things to even know about this, which means you have to really care. And most people care about so much other stuff in their life, they don't have time to keep up on all of what is happening. And so as a result, these changes are made without our consent, without what I believe is proper testing. Yes, they test the fruits and the vegetables, but do they test our bodies? And because of the indirect effects, it's really challenging to even do those studies because a lot of these effects are cumulative and are going to be different per individual. And some people are going to have no problem with it, and other people may have an enzyme normal variation, which changes their ability to break down one of the chemicals, such as in the case of autism. There is a link between some of the chemicals in our environment, in our cleaning products, and our pesticides, that there's a natural variation of people who don't break it down that readily, like BPA is one of them. And as a result, those with autism apparently have higher levels of BPA in their blood that they can't really clear. Does that cause autism? Nobody knows. Nobody knows because it's so convoluted. It's so indirect. And when we have people overseeing our systems, like our food supply, and we don't know what's going on, and we're just blanket told, don't worry about it, by the people who have a vested interest in making sure mass production is as cheap and productive as possible, which is not in our interest or even their interest of protecting the microbiome or our bodies. And so as a result, executives who are profit motivated make decisions that impact us that we don't fully understand or fully realize. It's like the red 40 dye and others that are banned in other parts of the world, that in the United States, people will say, no, it's absolutely fine. We've done the studies. Don't worry. We've done the studies. The studies are fine. And any dissenting opinion that comes out on social media, the bot farms are there to discredit them. And this was what happened with the food babe. And she was able to be successful in lobbying and advocating and getting, I believe it was Red 40 taken out recently. And it was with so much backlash because the vested interest in our country is not in our well-being. And so while many of you know the story, while other countries were using natural fruit dyes to flavor things like Fruit Loops and cereals, because those chemicals were banned, because the research over there shows that it has major problems, neurodevelopmental problems in our children. Okay, our children. Like, think about the children. And yet over in our country, they're like, no, our science, no, it doesn't show that. It's totally safe, totally fine. Yep, we agree. Oh, dissenting opinion? Send the butt farm after them. It's crazy. And so if we take that example from the food industry and we say, okay, does this apply in other examples, such as glyphosate, pesticides? We need to ask ourselves, is there censoring of those that try to bring awareness to these issues. And indeed, with all of those, there is. And I'm not going to go into all the different accounts that I have seen, but there is backlash for trying to present an alternative argument that some of these interventions are not actually healthy for us and healthy for our bodies. So in my view of transhumanism, it goes something like this: the ethical application of transhumanism. I'm going to say it every episode, just in case I have somebody tuning in for the first time who is still very frightened by the notion of very invasive technology being used against us. And rightfully so, because in the world where I exist, there is corruption beyond corruption that is coming to light. And so in places like that, transhumanism and the advent of futuristic technology that would be incredibly invasive and potentially misused is cause for concern. I believe that there is another way to do it. And right now I'm an N of one, at least in my world, trying to raise awareness about the positive aspects that we can do right and ethically for everybody. My view of transhumanism is that there are these little sensors in our body, extracellular and intracellular, and they actually report back when we are exposing ourselves to harmful things. We don't have to rely on an organization like the EPA, which has some great wins. I'm not here to knock all of the regulatory bodies that have done great work, but there are also many examples, and the FDA, many, many examples where they have fallen short. And in a society with late stage capitalism, where I presently exist, some of these are epic failures. So when we're relying on corrupted systems or inefficient, ineffective bodies of regulatory agencies, we are setting ourselves up for miserable, painful experiences, if not outright casualties. And I'm going to get into the pharmaceutical industry in a separate episode, but relying on big pharma doesn't help us either. If we're getting sicker, which we are, and we are not understanding why it's happening, these sensors will allow us the information that we need as sovereign beings to make the right decisions and to have the experiential data that we need to push back and say, red 40, I've isolated it, this effect here. And that is a data that we can use to make changes, or glyphosate in our children with certain genetic variations, or BPA in those that are predisposed towards autism. When we understand what's actually happening inside of our bodies, we don't have to have a hand waving, oh, it's fine, we've done the science. Yeah, we paid the scientist and everything to make sure that the results came out exactly the way we wanted it to. We don't have to fall prey to any of that anymore. By understanding if our food is actually just as nutritious as it was or is supposed to be, that allows us to make the right eating choices. I'm no longer vegetarian since finding out how hard it is, apparently, at least in a third world country, not eating processed foods, not eating the vegetarian meals, the pre-prepared ones, the fortified ones. Many vegetarians do absolutely fine. Vegans do absolutely fine. But where I was at, just eating whole foods, I don't mean the store, I mean just the fruits and the vegetables and the legumes, cooking them from scratch. hours, not the lentils, of course, but would literally cook my black beans for 6 to 8 hours. And so understanding that what's supposed to be healthy, like not using iodized salt, I didn't realize that was a big deal. Unless you're eating seaweed soup, which I wasn't. So understanding how food is not just supposed to satiate us, but to nourish us, and understanding the impact of that, we never have to be tricked again by anybody trying to sell us snake oil, telling us that it's fine for us. And if we can show that there is an increase in reactive oxygen species and free radical production after we eat strawberries, non-organic strawberries, which are loaded with 15 different pesticides, then we actually have a case to say, hey, maybe this doesn't actually work. Right? And if we can show over the long term that there are substantial changes to our gut microbiome when we're eating some of the preservatives that are optional, actually, some of the preservatives in crackers and in our fast food are just to preserve the shelf life, to reduce waste. How about we reduce production? Right? Why are we absorbing the cost if it negatively impacts us? Imagine my surprise when I realized that the crackers that I loved were loaded with a preservative that it's like in yoga mats. And that was completely optional because you can buy crackers without preservatives and they only last, I think, up to a year, like 9 months to a year. That's totally fine for me. I don't need my crackers to last 2 to 4 years. And so when we just have this blanket and hand wave, no, it's fine. This is just industry standard. This is just what we do. We have no recourse to be able to say, stop. That's what I believe the power of ethical transhumanism is.